I want to thank everyone for being here. I want to apologize for my background. I'm at the Cantor Museum right now, where I have a class visit coming up, but I tried to come here and do this early and they ran out of rooms. So I'm in the cafe. I apologize if it's a little chaotic, but we're going to persevere. Thank you all for coming here today to join us for what is for sure going to be an incredibly inspiring artist talk with in honor of Native American Heritage Month with photojournalist Tailyr Irvine, who's a member of the Confederated, Salish, and Kootenai tribes. This talk is graciously sponsored by the Foothill College Native American Heritage Month committee members, as well as the Foothill College Photography Department. Irvine was born and raised on the Flathead Indian Reservation in Western Montana and graduated from the University of Montana with a bachelor's degree in journalism only in 2018, which was pretty much mind-blowing for me when I was reading her bio. Her work focuses on providing in-depth representations of the lives and complex issues within the diverse communities that make up Native America. She is a member of the 2019 National Geographic Explorer cohort, and I cannot wait to hear more about that as well. And she's worked in newsrooms across the country before becoming an independent photojournalist and documentary photographer. Her clients, also equally impressive as her life, include the New York Times, the Washington Post, ESPN, CNN, the Smithsonian, HuffPost, Buzzfeed, and High Country News, which is a personal favorite of mine, I have to say. I would love to live in Paonia. My gosh. So with that, Tailyr, just want to thank you so much for coming today. How we'll run the program, everyone, is that Tailyr is going to do a presentation for everyone, and then we'll hold our questions until she's finished. She should be wrapping up in about 40 minutes at the most. So again, Tailyr, with that, I'm going to hand it over to you. And again, thanks everyone for being here. We appreciate you.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm just going to start with my presentation. I'll share the screen. And okay, so like Judy said, my name is Tailyr Irvine. I was born and raised on the Flathead Reservation in Montana. I'm a Confederate member of the Confederated, Salish, and Kootenai tribes. So if you look at this map right here, you can see the United States, this little corner of Montana, and my reservation is right here, about 1.5 million acres in the corner of Montana. I went to school of journalism, and I went to a few newsrooms before I became an independent photographer. And if you guys do have questions or something, like you can put them in the chat and someone can play them down while I go. I don't want it to just be like a straight 40 minutes, but of me talking. So if you guys have anything you want to say or any comments or concerns or anything, just let me know. So about me more, I graduated high school in 2011 and college in 2018. So it's a 7-year gap. This is my nephew, Andrew. You're going to see a lot of him because he's my favorite person and I photograph him constantly. Yeah, I had a big gap between 7 years. I just like to bring this up, especially when talking to colleges, because there is no linear path to what you're going to do or who you're going to become. College is really hard for me. I kept having family issues coming up. I kept having a lot of my relatives die. And so I'd go to school and then drop out, and then go to school and then drop out, and then go to school and drop out for like 7 years, apparently. And in the meantime, I worked at a pizza shop, a dorm, a casino, a coffee shop, a bank, and a carousel. So again, there's no linear path to journalism or to the career you're hoping. It just kind of comes as it comes. And I want to do an overview arc of like, what is photojournalism? It's a record of history. Photojournalism is a visual record, obviously. And I chose these two images because when I was in college, they really stuck out for me. The Falling Man, this is from 9/11. For those of you who don't know, we're all alive during that time, but 9/11 happened, and this image was one of the most controversial images to print. On the left is what they deemed Falling Man, a man who chose to jump out of the window of the Twin Towers instead of letting the fire consume. And so for me, when I seen that images like 15 years later, when I was sitting in college, it really like punched me right in the chest, and it made me feel like very deeply and emotional. And that was kind of it for me. I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to do journalism. I want people to see images and feel something and understand communities in a way they wouldn't, even if they weren't there. kind of for me. And just kind of an overall arcing of what happened in 2020, kind of an important reminder of what journalism is, and specifically photojournalism, and how it documents one of the craziest years of our lives. So remember, it started in January, obviously. This is from the New York Times Year in Pictures. And so these are just people celebrating at Times Square. And it quickly goes to the pandemic. This is a makeshift hospital in China where all the beds for people with COVID. Kobe died. The toilet paper, paper towels, the masks, consumerism with that stuff after the lockdown. The mass graves for all the bodies that we couldn't get into the ground fast enough. George Floyd happened, the protests. What it looked like for sports when there were no fans, what the world looked like when it was shut down. This is important to remember and document that as well, not just the big stuff, the little things too. How COVID affected elder patients in hospice, in nursing homes, what that looked like for them on an individual level, the lonely, the isolation we all felt in photos. The election of that year, in school, you know, what it looked like when kids finally went back to school, how different that was, how our lives have changed, you know, forever. And then the first vaccine. So these are all huge stories of our lifetimes. And I want you guys to think like how it matters who's telling these stories. What's it like with George Floyd, the pandemic, the death? Who's telling these? Who's photographing them? How would it differ if only one group photographed? If only the wealthy and the elite got to photograph these? How our history would look different from that year? How George Floyd would look if it was only photographed by white photographers? How the election would look if it was photographed by one group of Democrats or Republicans? How school would look like if it was photographed by people with no children or people with children, or schools on the reservation, or schools in your hometown versus schools in New York, or schools in Chicago, how this all looks different depending on who's photographing, and how that year that we just look back at, how it's documented, how different it would look if it was documented by different groups, and why it's important that we, as a whole, document these important life-changing events with a diverse group of photographers, because it is history. We are teaching history for future generations, and so it really matters who's telling these stories. So Native Americans, why I'm here, Native American Heritage Month, a whole month for us. I want you guys to see that word and think consciously about what image popped into your head when you heard it. Odds are it's probably something like this. This is a screen grab I took from about an hour ago when I was touching up this presentation. And this is what happens when you Google Native Americans today. You see a bunch of regalia, people of the past. Everything looks very old. There's only one person in contemporary clothes, and that's Sharice Davis on the top right. But other than that, it just looks like people of the past, people who don't exist anymore, people in costume, right? And I want you to think about how that affects the way that we see Natives today, right? So if you Google Native Americans, this is what happens. You can see National Geographic Kids, and the consequences of this, right? The consequences are only being shown as monolithic, as one person, as people of the past, of a vanishing race, and what that looks like for people like me. So when I went to college in 2011 for the first time as a freshman at Washington State University, people asked me if I grew up in a teepee. They asked me if I rode horses to school, if my tribe lived in the same house. And so there's 8,000 of us in my tribe. So definitely not. But the consequences of what happens when the media only shows one person, and that's just my consequence personally, is feeling isolated already as an 18-year-old, leaving home for the first time, leaving my reservation for the first time, where I'm surrounded by natives, where I didn't realize that we were the minority's minority, that people didn't know we existed still. And kind of the culture shock that felt for me, and the isolation it felt to have it like thrown in my face over and over again, people asking ignorant questions, not knowing anything about me or who I came from, and just relying on these stereotypes that they've seen in the media over and over and over again. So since 1816, which when the camera was first invented, Native American stories were told by outsider perspectives. Generally people parachuting in from wherever, generally like white men. The most famous one is Curtis Edwards. Edward Curtis, sorry. And he wrote the book, The Vanishing Race, which focused on documenting natives from everywhere, all over the country into like while they're still alive before they vanish, where they disappear. And for the consequences that book has had on almost every native I know, or every native I do know, is that people don't think we exist anymore. People don't treat us like humans because they don't think we exist anymore. So if you think about the power that photography has for that one person and how it's generations and generations later, it's still affecting us today, you realize the power photography has, and specifically the power of who holds the camera. And so for me, I really wanted to change that. I wanted to change the perspective. I'm like a single drop in a bucket, but I want to photograph the Native America that I know, that I'm familiar with, the one that I see every day. And, you know, this is what brought me to journalism, was to change narrative. I think there's a lot of ignorance out there, and the ignorance specifically around Native culture and community is because people don't know we exist anymore. People don't know we exist anymore because the media is not portraying it. And so I decided to do my part and portray accurately what I see in my own community. And so I started just photographing things that I know, things that I see all the time. So this is on the left is my SWAT house. It's kind of back in the corner behind the tree. You can't really see it, but this is a little bridge over this spring that never freezes. There's a ladder to the left, a bucket that we put the water in and carry it over to the fire. Behind it, it's what I do with my family on Sundays. And on the right is the medicine tree. This is what me and my tribe do. We return to our homelands. This is not on the reservation. This is about a couple hours, 3 hours away from my reservation, where we were aboriginally from. And we visit every year to pray. And that tree is part of our creation story. And so kind of showing, you know, yeah, it's like Native American culture, Native American history, but it's not how people think it is. On the right side, specifically, people are in, you know, contemporary clothes. They're wearing like, you know, sports regalia and like raincoats because it's raining, like just showing what life looks like for me. I started photographing, you know, this is a town I was living in, just practicing and, you know, things I know, the rodeo, a little bar. This was kind of creepy, actually, the left side. I was just pulled over because I thought it was pretty light, and the other guy was smoking. It looked really cool, but he was mildly creeped out. And my nephew. So this is a powwow, it's more native stuff, right? But in a contemporary way, I think. This is my nephew when he was dancing grass. I'm taking a picture of him. This is when he was playing at the creek at the powwow because it was too hot. Him and my dad picking roots, what the roots look like, and then teepee poles, you know, just things that I was seeing. Obviously, I was a very beginning photographer at this time. The photos aren't, you know, magical or excellent, but they're life. It's what we're supposed to do when we take photos, is document life, and that's what I was trying to do. And so these photos and learning about the camera and like, you know, practicing with my family and taking pictures of things I know led me to things that I was curious about. So I don't know if you guys know what Standing Rock is. The Standing Rock protest was protesting the Dakota Access Pipeline. And it was the largest gathering of Native nations since Wounded Knee. It was a huge protest in South Dakota. People from all over the world were coming to protest this pipeline that was going directly affect this reservation. And so I drove, it was about 11 hours from my school. I drove there, maybe like $200 in my pocket. It wasn't very much. I was very not funded at this time. And I just went to check it out and see what was happening and photographing it. So I went there in September for the first time and just photographed what life looked like. And in the mainstream media news, like once this got big, I was there before it got really blown up in the news. And so I was just kind of photographing what it looked like. And it felt just kind of like a camp, honestly. Like there were children everywhere. But once it became a national news event, things changed really quickly. A lot of photographers and journalists from across the country kind of like descended upon this event. It turned into kind of like a circus. There were people everywhere. There were people protesting, like professional protesters from California that would come. Sorry, I see there were professional like protesters coming from California. The vibe of the rally or the protest changed deeply and became something almost unrecognizable to me. But in the beginning, it was just like a gathering of people. It was very peaceful. It was very quiet, and it just felt honestly like a powwow to me. When I went back, it got bigger and bigger, obviously. And I think that what the mainstream media tended to focus on was the violence of it, which would be, if you guys remember, like the water cannons and the dog biting and all those huge moments. And as a young journalist, I kept going back. I was there 3 times for weeks, and there was no violence. And I remember thinking like how frustrated I was that I'm missing all the action. Like every time I left, something big would happen and I'd miss it. And then I realized as I was maturing into a different journalist, a better journalist, that this is a story. These are what's happening. This is what life looks like. It's not always the big glitzy glam. It's the quiet moments behind the protests. You know, the kids, the shoe fell off and he's giving his brother his shoe back. Like, you know, the gentle moments of a protest that I think are equally important as the big ones, and showing what life is like behind the big sparkly moments, which is just life. You know, and I tend to focus on children a lot in my work because I think how society treats children and how communities treat children tells a lot about that area. And here the kids are just being kids. You know, they didn't know they're at this historical event. They're just playing on this hill. And if you can tell, like this photo, it's not even in focus. The back shoe was in focus, not even him. And so it's like, you know, as you're learning, things happen, but the moment is good. And I think moments outlast technology, like technicalities. Wow. And eventually at the protest, you know, the Army Corps of Engineers announced that they're suspending the project. And so there's this big celebration in the middle, and everyone was like cheering and happy. And I crawled onto something, I don't know, and got this big photo of the group. As you know, that decision was reversed later, but in this moment, it felt like everyone's hard work and all the months of protesting finally paid off. And that was just done without, I think I ended up publishing them in local papers, but it was done without being assigned. I just went to check it out. But those photos landed me my internship in Dallas. So using those photos to apply for internships. And that's where I really started to learn photography and like learn how to create better photos, learn how to get the face in focus and not the shoe. And you just do it by like sheer just assignment after assignment after assignment after assignment. Like I think I was doing a ton of assignments a day. I was photographing thousands of photos a week. And just things that I had no experience in. Like this is Harrison Barnes, a camp for the NBA and the WNBA, things I have no access to in Montana. I got to photograph there and like really learn how to take good photos and like cut my teeth on, you know, people who it will not harm if I do a bad job. A lot of sports. I think sports is probably the best way to become technically sound at photography because it's really hard, it's really fast, and there's a lot of movement. And, you know, concerts, learning how to make something kind of boring, because concerts are very fun and very cool, but like they're just standing on stage singing, you know, so that's not exciting. And so trying to like figure out like, you know, how to get glasses, reflection in his glasses, like trying to figure out how to make photos more exciting that are actually quite boring. And then learning how to tell a long-term project, long-term story project. And using, you know, where I'm from and how natives historically are marginalized by the media and how they're ignored and stereotyped, and taking my background with me on those areas and applying it to stories I tell in other areas, you know, like it's not just unique to Americans being stereotyped, like every community stereotyped, like especially Black communities as well. You know, there's Black fathers are usually stereotyped as absent or leaving or, you know, deadbeats. And I was aware of how I felt with my community stereotypes. So I worked really hard to avoid all those, as anyone should for journalism. But I think when you're used to the media doing it to yourself and your community, you really focus on trying not to do that to other communities. So taking what I learned from home, and, you know, as I was learning at this internship and had access to resources telling me how to do it better, really helped me tell this story, which is about Texas's first domestic violence shelter for men, where men who are homeless because of domestic violence are able to go to this place and seek shelter. And so this man was with his partner. She abused him and then, you know, kicked him out. And he came here with his son, and just showing the challenges of not only being homeless, but being homeless as a father. And so, you know, the portrait I told, there's many ways to show homelessness. I don't think you guys would know this man was homeless if I didn't tell you the story, right? Like the story to the left, or the photo to the left, has, I think, sensitivity, and it shows him as like a gentle human and like, you know, maybe a little bit vulnerable with his positioning. And then the right shows him as a good father. And just kind of followed him through what it's like to be homeless in a city and how hard it is. So he had to go to get a job interview, but he had to get a suit. So he had to take the bus, 8-hour days on the bus with this man while he had to go across town to get a suit and then back across town to get an application, then back across town. Like it was insane. Meanwhile, like, navigating like his son, he had to leave his son for the first time. So this is at 5 a.m. His son had to go to school. And it was the first time his son left his side in 2 weeks. And so kind of getting these moments as well. And then that internship led me to Florida, where I interned with the Tampa Bay Times and photographed a lot more sports. Again, I love sports. I think there's a story in everything. For me, particularly, I love that sports are so dramatic. It's so silly, right? But there's always like a winner and a loser. And like these men are getting so upset. And I think, compared to like the right side where the guy's like sleeping, it's like spring training, all these like, like out of shape baseball players come to get back in shape and they're just tired and exhausted. And I think with sports, there's always like a winner and a loser and there's tension there, and it just makes good stories. It's outside of just like, oh, this action shot. I learned how to photograph natural disasters. We don't have hurricanes in Montana, obviously, but it was my first one, and it was just learning more about how to photograph people in these vulnerable states, losing everything, how to make things different, how to tell these stories better. So again, all these internships taught me is, one, how to be like technical, how to use the camera, learn how to do it better, learn how to do it quicker, find these moments, having editors look over my work, teach me and like critique me and push me to get better and not be scared of the critique. Showing someone your entire take is like very nerve-wracking, but having an editor who is helpful and caring and shows you how to get better and like sees where your mind is going through your photos is like invaluable. Like you can't get that better. And so I think finally, after doing these internships the last few years and working in Florida for a couple of years, I decided to go freelance and start telling stories that I care about, that I finally feel like I'm a good enough photographer to tell. And so I went home. This is a story with ESPN. It's on the missing and murdered Indigenous woman movement crisis. And ESPN reached out while I was living in Florida and asked if I wanted to photograph this story, which is a story on this boxing gym. So I don't know if you guys know this, but women go missing or murdered at rates higher than any other ethnicity in the country. And the murderers are often not caught. And if they are caught, they're not charged appropriately. A lot of the bodies are like miscategorized as like accidental deaths, or, she's a party girl, she died from the elements, that kind of thing. And so this story is kind of about a gym in Browning, Montana, which is on the Blackfeet Reservation, just north of mine, about a man who is teaching girls to box in self-defense in light of this epidemic. So again, it's not solving the story, but it's a piece that makes, puts into light of how this community deals with something so tragic. So, this is on the left, people are training. On the right is the girl who's focused the story, the daughter of the person at the gym. And these girls are just getting ready to train. On the left is the sister of one of the girls who went missing in 2016. Her name was Ashley Loring. She just disappeared. Her family got a tip that the bones were found, that her sister's body was, this is a trigger warning, it's pretty intense, just so you guys know. They got a tip that their sister was pushed in some kind of like hole, like that's what the body got rid of. And so they're out searching, and the Blackfeet Reservation is like 2.5 million acres. It's huge, it's icy, it's pretty rugged terrain. And so they went, once the snow melted, into this field where there's a lot of like rivers, underground rivers and caves. And so this is a photo taken when they found bones, but it turned out just to be animal bones. But it just shows, the heartache of what it's like dealing with this stuff, and when there's not a lot of help from the police, and when it feels like no one's really looking anymore after years, kind of the heartache of that goes through. And the right side is a daughter from the gym, Donna Kipp. She was an activist at the school, raising awareness, and also one of the leaders at the boxing gym. Which leads me to my blood quantum project. This is a story that's really close to me. And again, I want to be clear that these stories are really intense. They're really tragic, and I wanted to feel like I was a good enough photographer to tell them. which is why I went away, learned for so long before I came back to my own community, because it's really scary coming back when people know you, and when they'll tell you that like you did a bad job or you messed up or this was awful, and they can just call you or text you or tweet at you or DM you, and like you're very accessible, which is good because it holds you to a higher standard, but also very scary. And so this story is with funding from National Geographic. It's what my grant is on, and the Smithsonian as well. So this displayed in the Smithsonian last February, and it's ongoing work with National Geographic. It's about blood quantum. So blood quantum is basically the fraction of how native you are, what percentage like of Indian, I guess was the term people use. And so like each native is born with a fraction, and to be enrolled in a tribe, you have to be usually at least a quarter. Sorry, I'm a little sick, so my throat is kind of closing. And for my tribe specifically, you have to be 1/4 Salish and Kootenai, otherwise your kid's not a part of that tribe. And so this project shows kind of like what makes someone native and who says, and how that affects who people choose to date. Because myself and my brother, who is on the left, we are 7/16 Salish and Kootenai, which means we're less than half. So if we want our child to be enrolled, we have to find someone from my tribe and date them. Otherwise, our kid won't be enrolled in our tribe, which is challenging on a lot of levels because there's only 8,000 members in my tribe. I'm related to like half of them. It's just a very intense, complex situation. And also, I don't live on my reservation, so like finding someone who is from my tribe, my age, single, in general, who I'm not related to, is like very small, and then finding someone who like I'm also attracted to, like get on the same level with, like have some interests, like it's almost impossible, I would say. And it should be said that you can only count one tribe at any time. So like my mom is Crow, which is a different tribe, and my dad is Salish and Kootenai. So we had to pick, and my family picked Salish and Kootenai. And so my dad's not quite full. He's like, I don't know, like 7/8, I think. And so we're not quite half, which means our child will not quite be a quarter. And so the bloodlines are disappearing, basically. And so I photographed my brother and Leah, his partner, who are expecting their first child. And then this is my cousin. She's also, I call her my sister because my family adopted her. We grew up with her, and her partner. And they're both pregnant in these photos. So Leah is Navajo, and these are both members of my tribe. And so kind of documenting the different types of dating and what happens when you date within your tribe and when you choose to not. And so this is Tiana and Nate's daughter. She's enrolled, but you see her blood quantum is 145, 256. And so her child would already be enrolled no matter what, because their family is so enrolled. But in order to date, Tiana and Nate had to go to the tribal offices of enrollment and make sure that they're not related. Right. So they went while they're dating, which is so awkward. They went to the tribe and be like, hey, we want to check that we don't have the same lineage at any point. And so that's like, it's a weird, embarrassing thing that people do that that's different, like for my community versus like, someone who is not native. They don't usually do that, I think, ever, unless it's a really, really small town, maybe. But generally, no. Whereas my brother's daughter, her name's Najoni, even though she's almost full blood native as a whole, Navajo, Salish, Kootenai, and Crow, she is not enough Salish and Kootenai to be enrolled in my tribe. And so what that looks like for my brother and for Leah versus Tiana and Nate, whose child is. We're a huge hunting family. So this is my brother hunting. That's how we, get meat for the year. It's a tradition. It's how we learn the land. It's how we bond as a family a lot of the time. So growing up, I only ate, deer meat, or like venison, as people call it, I guess. And so what that looks like, and while I went with my dad and my brother as kids and children, like we learned stories about like where my dad hunted with his dad and like different parts of the land and stories behind those parts of the land. And it's a way that we keep traditions alive. Because his daughter is not enrolled in our tribe, she will never be able to hunt with them on tribal land ever. Like she's not allowed. Non-members are not allowed to go hunting, and after she turns 18, she won't even be allowed to accompany him on hunts. Versus Tiana and Nate, they have a foster daughter. Their foster daughter is Tiana's biological brother's daughter, And because of ICWA, which is the Indian Child Welfare Act, Native kids go to Native families, right? And that's important. That's how it should be, given the history of the children taken from Native families and given to white families for assimilation. It's a very important law that we have, but that influences identity, right? So if Tiana and Nate weren't enrolled, then they wouldn't be able to adopt the daughter, right? So it's kind of these really big issues that affect our people. And so that's kind of the big story I'm working on now, is how people who choose to date and don't date, how they choose to love, basically, and the repercussions of who they love and how that affects the completed genocide of my tribe, basically. Because if you don't date within your tribe, then the tribe is going to go extinct one day, because you can only procreate in the pool for so long, which is how it's designed. It's designed to be a completed genocide. So that's the story I'm documenting now with Nat Geo. And I can talk more in the questions about how I got the grant. Basically, you apply for it. I met them at workshops and just started applying for grants. And this is a story that I'm really passionate about, that I'm equipped to tell, a story from my community, which is what they look for a lot, and a story I'm looking forward to continuing. And then as well in Montana, I don't just focus on Native issues. I focus on, this is COVID and the jails, where I got to go into a jail during COVID, which is kind of unheard of because jails were pretty locked down, but the officer in the corner was so exhausted and so underfunded, and they couldn't control the outbreaks. People were sleeping in the hallways. They were over the limit of capacity, and he was so overwhelmed that he's like, "Yep, media, come on in." So that was with the Times. They let me go in and photograph, which was really dangerous because it was before the vaccine and it was pretty early COVID. So I was terrified, but it's it's part of the story of COVID, and document that in Montana, what it looks like. And then, elections and hunting and a lot of other things that I really enjoy photographing. And I'm very lucky that I'm able to go to my community now and have editors trust me because they know my work, they're familiar with it, where I can pitch my own stories and show how different events affect our communities. This was also in Browning, which is on the Flathead Reservation. Chief Earl, or old person, died. He was the longest serving tribal elected official in the country ever. He was pretty much the heart of the Blackfeet Nation. He was the leader. He was like everyone's grandfather, and he died. And so as soon as that happened, I emailed my editor at the New York Times. So this is a story, I want to do it. And they let me write it too, which was kind of a big deal. So documenting how this affects community. And again, I think when I was, when I was early career, because I was pushing so hard against the Native stereotype of like regalia and teepees and people of the past, that I went really hard in the other direction of not showing anyone in regalia ever. And then as I matured into a better storyteller, I realized like that doesn't help if I only have people who are not from this area telling stories in regalia. Like I should be able to do that too, and there should be a balance. And so in the next few images, you start seeing more of the balance of me including more regalia and more traditional things in my photography that published. And so this is at his funeral. The kids. And then, this is where he was buried. This is where his funeral happened. Obviously like buffalo hides and drums and headdresses and, a teepee. But there's also like, a girl in the center is in jeans. So it's not like I'm trying to have this, this photo could be taken now or taken in 1800s kind of image. I wanted to show the truth, and this is what it looked like. This is my nephew again, Andrew, my dad and my brother. You guys will see them a lot in my work. I focus on my family and about where I'm from. This is for Thanksgiving, just showing like, what a normal Thanksgiving looks like for a Native person, right? Because Thanksgiving is, one of the starts of the genocide that happened, and, people are curious, like what it's like for Natives. And so for my family, I photographed, my family hunts in the morning and then we have a dinner. Like, do we celebrate the Pilgrims? No, but we have an excuse to gather as a family and we use it. So this is a morning hunt of my dad, my brother, and my nephew, Andrew. And then one of my latest pieces of work, this happened last summer, 2022, is kind of my big step towards reclaiming regalia, reclaiming, the story. And I wanted to talk about the first powwow on my reservation that happened after the pandemic, what it looks like to gather again. And I don't know if you guys know this, but Native Americans died at higher rates from COVID as well, obviously because of lack of healthcare, lack of access. There are a lot of reservations are in rural places. So a lot of people died, and so it looked like gathering again for the first time in 3 years. And what we missed, and what I focus on, is the regalia, because for like Native people, regalia is a reflection of who you are, and so every piece you collect tells a story of like who you are, where it comes from, and some of that is from beadwork that your mom does or that your grandmother has, or if you have regalia passed down to you, and what it looks like, and what it means. People see regalia a lot, but not in any kind of sense, I think, that shows it in a contemporary way. So I really want to focus on bright, poppy photos. Like, I didn't want it to get used at all with pictures from the 1800s. I want to show outside the arena, no one dancing, just what it looks like when people are at a powwow. And this is on my reservation. This is a woman who, her quote was like, "My vibe is pink," or something like that. Like, it's just the vibe for the summer. And like, she has like a pink acrylic nails, like it matches her beadwork. She has a pink shawl, a pink umbrella. Like, she's like really cool, and I want to photograph her. And she's awesome. This is a little kid, drinking his little sugar shack. And I think for me, I think of powwows, and I think of like the vendors, and like how all the kids like go to the vendors for the $1 trying to get like their whatever candy from their parents or their aunties or whatever. And so again, you have the regalia, but you have like the life around it, and people not in regalia, and showing what that looks like. Like Mickey Mouse beadwork, like she loved that. She got that day. In a unicorn chair. She's adorable. We love her. And then again, like, I think you guys notice, like, most of the people are smiling in this. Like, it's just what it is. So this is inside a teepee. I think people probably want to know what that looked like. And then just him in his regalia, and like why he dances, and the pieces that mean the most to him. So he said he dances for people who can't dance anymore. Like, that's what you do. You dance for those who can't. And then, just more powwow stuff outside the arena. Like, that butterfly was, dragonfly is from her first outfit ever. And so, like, because everyone outgrew their outfits, almost everyone had new regalia, all the kids, because you grow so fast. And so she incorporated the dragonfly from her first outfit into her outfit now. And that was important. And so that's the kind of the latest story that I've told. And now I'm working on other stories, continuing my blood quantum work. And yeah, just trying to get more stories from Native America. And I think for me, I didn't include a lot of these, but there are stories that I do that I include natives in every day, not because it's a native angle story, it's a story about healthcare, and I choose to photograph natives for it, because I think true representation is having natives in every story, not just powwow stories, but stories about healthcare, stories about reopening, like just including them everyday things. And that's kind of the work that I do. So that's all. That was a lot.
Tailyr. No, it wasn't. It wasn't enough.
Oh, it was right on 140 too. Oh, that's awesome.
Oh no, I know. I could sit for another 2 hours. I hope it's not too crazy loud in here, but that was an incredible. Kate, hi, Professor Yordall. I think she's got to take off.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I have to take off, but I just so much appreciate your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have like 3 pages worth of personal questions, but one thing I want to just throw out there is that I got my start at the Dallas Morning News, and the person who started the shelter, you did the story on, I lived in that shelter for a year, the family place, before they started.
Cool.
Yeah, so Paige is a really good and very old friend of mine. So I'll be sure to let her know that I got to see that today. Wow. Okay. I've got a million questions, but there's also 3 questions right now in the Q&A. So if you don't mind, I'd like to start there. And we'll start with Evan, who asked, Tailyr, at what age did you start taking photos? And when did you really decide on photojournalism as a career, or was it always going to be photojournalism? Thank you, Evan.
I think I always took photos. I got cameras for Christmas, video cameras and regular cameras, but I didn't start taking it seriously until I went to college, and took that class that I showed with the Falling Man. I think that's when I kind of it was a required class called the History of Media, the History of Media and Literacy, I think. And it was it's so boring. I didn't want to take it. It was required. And in that class, I learned a lot about the history of media, and like the teacher was really fun and engaging and made it like a very interesting class. And that's when I kind of like also love writing a lot. And so I originally wanted to go into writing, I think, because it's kind of my favorite thing to do. And then when I realized how hard photos hit in that chapter of like photography, when they showed the 9/11 photos, I kind of was like, no, that's actually what I want to do. And I think what I love about photography the best is that it's cross-cultural. Like you don't have to speak the same language to know. You don't have to be, native to understand like feelings between a mother and a son, or like, you don't have to be from the US to understand like homelessness and like a father's love. Like it just crosses cultural boundaries. And I like that a lot too, that anyone can look at the photos and like understand emotion and feeling. And that's kind of why I decided to pursue photo specifically.
Yeah, thanks. That was a fantastic answer. And I have to say, I also super appreciate the candor with which you shared your lived experience, both as just a human being, as a Native American, as a woman, or as a person who's looking to be in love. I was just so taken with the blood quantum, very short description. And so eventually I want you to come back and talk about that, because that is fascinating. But let me go to the next question. I need to control myself. So an anonymous attendee is asking, Taylor, do you feel as though photography and its aspects have changed how you perceive your surroundings?
Yes, always. I'm obsessed with light. And so even if there's nothing like photo worthy, like if I see a really good like ray of sunshine, I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna like put a person in there and like photograph it constantly. Or like my brain kind of works like, that'd be such a good photo. I think I say that like 100 times a day, like, oh, that'd be such a good photo. I would love that. Like and just like perceiving the way events happen. Like if there's a good moment, like if someone's like, if it's raining and someone's like kissing on the street, I'm like, ah, such a good photo. That'd be such a good feature. Like because a part of newspapers too is sometimes you have to go out and just do a feature photography, which is like anything. So you have to just go look for moments in the community, which is helpful, but I hate it. So just trains your brain. Like when it snows, I'm like, oh my God, thank God I want to go outside and like do a weather feature about like how it's snowing and like photograph someone snow blowing for the 100th time. So I think it makes me appreciate light a lot more. And I think how quickly it changes and just the way I look at things in that way. And kind of like everything is like, that was such a good story. Like you can't turn it off.
We have very similar minds. I just also want to say that too. And if I ever heard, hey, can you go out and get some wild art? If I never heard that again, as long as I live, I will be a very happy person. So I totally understand that kind of just go be creative on a turn of a dime just to fill a space. And when you were talking about light, I also was thinking a lot about that beautiful portrait of your dad and your brother and your nephew in the field, just seemingly very monochromatic photograph, right? And just a very simple moment, but it is those simple moments, those gentle moments, like you described at the pipeline protest, right? Where that is where we connect, I think, as human beings, like even in the midst of war, there are these gentle moments. And I just really appreciate the way you use that word. I'd never heard it expressed like that before. And so I will have students that will hear that and I will give you credit.
Thanks.
All right, next question. This is from Mohammed Tosun. Hi, Mohammed. Hi, Taylor. Do you feel as though, wait, I already asked that. Sorry, this is from Lee Q. What differences do you see between photojournalism and other types of photography, like landscape photography? Interesting question.
Yeah, I do for journalism. I do a lot of landscape photography because it's like setting the scene of where someone lives. And so for this last story that I worked on this month about, suicide, specifically, sorry, this is another trigger warning, suicide by gun. It's a difficult photo story to tell because the person is no longer with you anymore, right? And so what I really focused on is kind of like using the land and the area that they're from kind of as metaphors and like, how changing light affects the mood of a photo. And so I think landscapes are a really good way to push storytelling and setting a scene of like suicides in Montana are really high because it's so rural. And so getting landscapes that are so rural and like things help advance a story. What I love about journalism is that you can trust the photos to not be manipulative. And I think the more and more we're seeing with AI and with the way how easy it is to edit and manipulate photos, just straight landscape photos, I have a hard time like, okay, like did it look like that? Or is like the contrast up 100% or is the saturation like a billion and the fall leaves? Like But I do have a lot of respect for landscape photography because it takes a lot of patience and time, and yeah, it can be really beautiful and add a lot to stories.
That's a great answer. Thanks. We've got some more questions coming down the pipe here for you. So Mike Klaus, thank you, Mike, for being here, is asking, I heard your experience being a freshman in college and having so many people who didn't know your culture still exists. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about this right now in the photo history class that I'm teaching. So before that happened, did you already know you wanted to bring awareness to Native America, or did your college experiences steer you in that direction? Good question.
Definitely the college experiences. Before, I didn't really know because it was just my life. Like I was just surrounded by it. My family is Native, my friends are Native. On my reservation, there are a lot of non-natives due to the Allotment Act and homesteading. But still majority everyone in my life was Native and knew me and knew Native history, and like it wasn't even like a question of like what is Native. Like blood quantum was something we talked about in elementary school. When I was like, oh, what's your blood quantum? Like asking my other friends, and like having like packs of people like, well, if we don't have kids, we'll just date each other if we're not related. Like, it's like things that are like completely normal to me, and not realizing like the record scratch when I went to college. I'm like, oh God, like this is insane and like very lonely. And I went from being surrounded by natives to being the only one on my dorm floor, and it was very challenging and very hard. And so I think using that experience and wanting to add what I can to make it easier for people behind me who go to college, and maybe someone's seen my story and like, okay, I know natives. One, like the identity story, if you see the whole piece, it includes like a lot, not just my family, but maybe like 10 other natives, and we all look very differently. And like, of course, natives from the Southwest are going to be a lot darker than natives in Alaska who don't see sun. People question like, you're not brown enough, like you don't have the correct features, and it's like, you don't know, like you have no idea. It's different shapes and sizes and colors and features. And so I think kind of being thrown off by entering the world off my reservation kind of tossed me in that direction of doing this work.
Again, I want to thank you just for being so open and sharing your lived experience. It's not easy to do with people who you haven't really met in person. But I really, it's just very powerful to hear you talk about it. So yeah, I just want to thank you for that. I have more questions if you're up for it. Are you up
Yeah,
for
of
it?
course. Yeah, go for it.
Cool. Okay. Lori Kalowski asks, she's a brilliant historian as well. Your blood quantum story is so interesting and important and also very complicated. Could you talk a bit more about what you're hoping the story might lead to, whether for Native Americans or non-Native American audiences? Thanks, Lori.
Yeah, I think the story is not really like, I think, a cut and dry activism story, which a lot of people hope like, what is the solution? How do we fix this? I think it's just kind of one of those things where there's not really a solution. Like the way the government set this up in the early 1900s, by making natives quantify, they send out government officials to say like, you're Native, you're not Native, you're Native, you're not Native, and how that affects my generation. I think just awareness of like what colonialism did and colonization did to tribes, and how it's not something that happened 100 years ago. It's like affecting my children and my nephews and nieces, and how that changes lives for them. I think my biggest goal with this project is education. I talked a lot about the ignorance that surrounded me when I left college, and I think the answer to ignorance is education, and that's all I'm hoping with this project, is to educate people on a piece of life they don't know about, a piece of history and and contemporary issues that it created. I think people think the genocide of natives happened, and it's not talked about, I don't think, enough. But what that looks like for future generations, what that looks like for my family, how genocide is still happening, because as long as we have the blood quantum system, it's still restricting how we procreate, which is problematic and troublesome. But the thing is, it's embedded into our constitutions, it's embedded into our tribal government. Our whole entire governments are based off of this because of colonization, and so changing it is incredibly difficult. It's built into like, and also there's no one way to tell like how you're Native. There's no test for it, right? We don't test other races. You don't have like a test to do like to prove that you're Black or to prove that you're white. Like you just are. So the problem with tests to determine citizenship is that being Native is not only a race, it's a legal status, and so it's really complex in that way. And you can't test by like cultural knowledge because of assimilation, like because children were kidnapped and stolen and raised off reservations. They don't have access to culture. And so you can't say like, well, if you don't know your culture, then you're not Native, because that's not fair. And you can't also, there's so many problems that you can't solve. And so it's really complex. And I think I'm just opening the door to talk about it and have some governments talk about it and hear what people are saying, because it needs to be addressed, but it's so complex. I don't know how to even begin.
Yeah, and that I might be super miseducated on this. So if I am, please let me know. I mean, feel free to just go, you're not right. But I've had friends of mine who are Native American talk about the complexity around the status they receive from having that blood quantum, but on the same hand, the discrimination or this pressure that they receive for having the blood quantum does that make sense? I guess what I'm saying, like, it's a legal status where it's respected by maybe tribal conferences, or I don't have the right words for that. And on the other hand, it's also used against them. And so there's this kind of struggle within themselves about whether or not to even have that blood quantum measured to some degree.
Yeah, the problem is it's tied to healthcare and land access and access to education. And so again, it's legal status. It's tied to all those. And, you know, like with my brother and his daughter, land access is so important. It's tied to the culture. And so you're not just seeing a genocide of people, but you're seeing a culture genocide too, and how both those are tied hand in hand. And so blood quantum will affect everyone eventually. And I think it's hard for people who are like deemed like 4 to 4, which is just not accurate. Like those aren't how we historically have done identification. Like we always intermarried with other tribes. So like my dad marrying a Crow woman would make that Crow woman my dad's tribe, and then it would just go that way. But there's it's hard to convince someone who is 4 to 4 that you need to change this policy, because they're like, well, it doesn't affect me, just stay within your tribe. And I think people from older generations are now coming around because their grandchildren aren't enrolled, and like, oh, this is the problem. And you have kids who are, 8 different tribes, but not enough to be enrolled in any of them. And so the issues that brings up too, of like identity and how we choose identify and how people choose to identify us.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for that answer. Appreciate you. Another question came up. Hi, Tailyr. Photojournalism is all about telling stories with your images. How do you pre-visualize, or I would ask, do you pre-visualize the photos and the stories before you begin on them or make them?
I do. I have ideas of what I want when I start, but it's almost never the case when I get there. I have like kind of like a shot list in my mind of what I want to get done, like, what the story is, who's in the story, what it's about. And I think reporters especially, assume that photos should match a story exactly. And I don't think that's good journalism. I think the best kind of photography complements a story. Like it shows things that the story doesn't get to, and different kind of stories that adds to their story. And so it's 2 separate stories that mix together to tell one whole story. And so for me, I look at the subjects, and I don't, if the story says like a blue shirt, I don't like go photograph a blue shirt. I do something different. And I also work a lot with light. And so in the summertime, it's a lot more difficult in Montana, especially because the sunrise is like 5 a.m. and it sets at like 11 p.m. And so trying to find those like morning lights and convincing people like, oh, let's get up earlier than we need to, was like very difficult. And so you kind of like, you can plan all day, like, oh, I'll have a beautiful sunrise over these buffalo that I'm photographing, and it's gonna be such a beautiful moment. And then it's cloudy and it turns from like dark blue to gray to grayer. Like, I try really hard. So I have like a list in my mind. I do some research on like where I'm going, who I'm photographing, what it looks like when I get there. But sometimes you just have no idea until you get on the road and you photograph. I love photographing in people's houses. It's kind of my go-to, is like seeing where they're from and what they're surrounded by. But sometimes people don't want you in their house, and that's fine. And you just have to pivot. Sometimes you have like a minute to make a portrait really fast, and you have to do what you work with. But most of the time I try to spend time, I think, is the biggest thing, is working with someone and spending time and realizing like, this is like, I do this all the time. I have work and papers all the time, but this could be the only time this person's photographed for a newspaper, and respecting that and respecting their nerves and making sure that they feel like the photo represents them. Because it's not just about you. It's like, we wouldn't have these jobs if people didn't agree to be photographed, and that's something we should never take for granted or like rush.
Yep, I agree 150%. Yeah, thanks for saying that. Really important. My colleague, our colleague, Cynthia Brandval, who is she's an art history professor at Foothill College, the chair, I believe, says, thank you so much for this great talk. Do you see your work being in conversation with artists who explore similar themes, such as James Luna and Wendy Redstar, Kanupa Hanska, Lugard, sorry, to name a few? Do you see your work in conversation with them at all, or?
I know there's a museum in Minnesota. The Minneapolis Institute of Art has a big exhibition going on right now called Natives in Photography from like 1890 to present. And then I know Wendy Redstar has an exhibit in there too. I have a photo in there. So that feels very awesome because Wendy is amazing and her work is incredible. And she's on a level that's much higher than me. And it's beautiful to be even next to her. I did photograph
that. I would argue that.
I did photograph Kanupa for a story in the Times. That's the only time I met him. I haven't met James, but I co-founded this organization called Indigenous Photograph. I stepped back recently to focus on my own work, but the organization is a database of Native photographers. For this reason, I think when I first started, I felt so isolated. I was obviously many times the only Native in a newsroom, and it was isolating and ignorant. And even at my internship in Dallas Morning News, like the intern director who's in charge of interns, we had this lunch and he was like, oh, I wish I was Native so my kid could get free college, right? And that's like me as an intern, terrified of saying anything. And I was like, my adrenaline was pumping and I was nervous and I like was pissed and I like think about it still and I get really upset about it. And like the fact that I felt like I had no power then and being so young and like not wanting to like cause a stink, and it was in front of everyone, like not just other interns but like other of my colleagues, and I wanted to be an issue and like just feeling isolated and like feeling like I couldn't use my voice. Obviously I no longer feel that way now. I'd let them know, but and I went to go email him a few years ago. He no longer works there. So I missed my boat on that. But we co-founded this organization called Indigenous Photograph, which is a database of other photographers, and going through and finding other photographers. And so we can all share, and we have community meetings a month, and we can all like commiserate together and talk about this and talk about issues that affect us and just not feel so alone. And so I think that really helped move the conversation forward, and also giving editors, because a big complaint we heard about like why we don't hire Native photographers for these stories, like we can't find them, they don't exist, I don't know where they are. And so like we had this huge database of like, here they are, like here where they're based, they're located, here's their email. Like there's no excuse anymore to not hire Native photographers. And that really, I think, pushed more conversations with all our work together. I don't know if I answered the question, but I think it's a small community and we all work to raise each other up because it is a small community and we all are familiar with each other's work and do our best to kind of raise each other.
Yeah, and I'm a photo editor. I come from a long, history of photo editing as well as making. And Indigenous Photograph is a lifesaver, I think. I mean, unfortunately, everybody is just kind of running with full speed ahead with no resources at media companies, which contributes to the lack of equitable storytelling. Just trying to, come on, we got to get someone, and that's always been an excuse, which is what it is. And so you've removed that barrier. And I don't feel like that it's too bad that you had to do that to increase the number of Native photographers being hired, or Indigenous photographers actually, because it's beyond Native American, it's actually Indigenous. But I'm very thankful that you did. So it's complicated, and I'm also super thankful for that work that you did. One more question, and then we'll cut you loose. Who are some of the photographers that inspired you? You talked about Wendy Redstar, but Nico was curious if you had any other photographers who might have inspired you or are inspiring to you now.
The very first, so in college, we had an assignment to go look at like photographers whose work we liked, and I had never seen any other photographers photograph natives in a contemporary way. And by means seen, like having it easily accessible and like in the realm of the internet that I was on, until I seen Matika Wilbur's work. She's a photographer based out of Washington, and she has this book out that's called project 567, and she photographed kind of in a response to Edward Curtis's work, which I should also say is unethical and staged. And I didn't say that earlier. He, would tell people not to smile. He would put, Plains headdress on Southwest natives, like made it so everyone looked the same. Like it was very unethical, the work that he did. She had a response to that where she went to every single federally recognized tribe in the country, which is 567 at the time of publishing. I think it's more now because people are getting recognized every day. And she photographed each community. She had a picture of each person, and it was incredible to see that body of work together, to see someone who had a similar goal in mind, and seeing her be able to articulate things that I was thinking and I wasn't able to wrap my brain on the concepts yet, knowing like I had these feelings. I know, like I was angry. I knew that the work needed to be done, but I couldn't articulate why I was angry or what needed to be done. And seeing her work really inspired me, and really changed the way I viewed photography. And like I was, hungry for more. And so she kind of really got me started on looking at other Native artists.
Thank you. Yeah, that's amazing. We're also studying, we just talked about her as well in our history of photography class around that exhibition that you referenced in Minnesota. And you said you had a photograph in that
Yep.
show. Okay, so that's amazing. It's up right now, and they don't really have a whole catalog available yet. I was looking everywhere to try to see everyone that was in it, but it looks absolutely spectacular. And
it was incredible seeing that group of photographers together. Like it was in photographers that I know, and as someone who started a database, I was like, oh wow, how did I miss this person? Like they're incredible, and like all the work was stunning and beautiful and diverse. I think people think there's like one box for Native photography, and that just blew it out of the water. Like there's so much different stuff. Like I was inspired. Like I wish I was more creative as some of these people. I'm like pretty much documentary and they're artists, and it's really cool to see.
But there's such a place for that too, right? So it's not that you have to be Wendy Red Star and have these, amazing.
Oh, I wish.
I mean, that photograph you have of the people walking in the field with the flags in that light is just like, oh my God, So I want you to just know that you're super valued, and so is your work. And we just really appreciate the time and effort it took for you to spend an hour with us today. And I can't wait to meet you in person. And I can't wait to tell Tara Pixley that we got to connect.
I talk with her tomorrow, I think. So
we'll tell her hi. We're co-writing a book on the decolonization of photojournalism. So anything you want to throw out, we will.
That's what I'm talking to her about tomorrow. So you'll see.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you're in.
Great.
Well, we're lucky. Cool. Well, thanks again. Really appreciate you. And thanks Dean Herman for being here too.
Thank you so much, Taylor.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, can't wait to meet you in person.
Yeah, thank you.
See you later.